Alright, so now we're on to the fun part of leather decorating, which is the stamping step. I'm going to demonstrate with the largest of the pieces and probably not actually show these smaller ones because it's the exact same procedure. It's the same kind of design, it just kind of extrapolated smaller. I'm going to keep the other pieces inside the bag while I'm working on the big one so that they don't dry out. And I'm going to work fast because with a piece this large, it is going to want to just dry out too much to work with before you're done. So the tools that I'm going to be working with today are beveling tools, which means that you are following along the cut lines that you made in the previous step, and you are compressing one side of the cut lines to create this illusion of depth. I guess it's not an illusion, because one side is going to be higher than the other, and the other side is also going to be textured. The lower edge is going to be textured because I'm using textured bevelers. You can use smooth ones. I found that textured bevelers look better when they've been painted. They tend to retain more of the dark, so you get more of a gradient. But you can do it with smooth bevelers if you want to. For these corners, in all of the little scale things that look kind of like hearts, but I think are supposed to actually be scales because this is Aquaman, I actually took one of these wide bevelers. You can pick up this wide beveler at Tandy's. It's just a regular craft tool. Cheap. Don't pay more than $5 for them. And filed it down into this right angle so that I could do all of those points very easily. This is a tool you'd have to make yourself, but all it takes is like a block of sandpaper. So it doesn't actually make it faster, but it does make it cleaner because all of your little corners there will be very precise. So in the previous steps for tracing and for carving, I've been saying that the order of operations doesn't matter. You just have to do all the lines at some point in some order. But for stamping, it kind of does, because especially when you've got lines that are meeting, which line you did last will be the one that is more visible, is more pronounced. So for the scales, I find that doing the corners first and then doing the edges works better. For these guys, I found that doing the kind of diagonal lines, because these are going to be a bunch of raised triangles alternating with compressed triangles. It'll make more sense once I start working on it. There is a preferred order of operations for these, and there is a preferred order of operations for this, and I'll show you. So, and this particular project is not all that exciting to do because it's a lot of the same thing. It looks beautiful when it's done, but it's got a lot of repetitiveness in it. So the reason I'm tapping it twice is the first time I am very precisely getting it in that corner, and then I am tipping it forward so that it is pushing the beveled texturedness further into it, because the first time you do a tap, when it's angled very far towards you, it makes a very steep angle, but you can see that this is not covering as much area as that is. And I think this is going to get really boring to try to show the whole thing, so I'm going to do these two lines of scales in their entirety, and then I'm going to show you how to do the edges there and not do the rest of this on camera, because really once you know how to do one, you know how to do all of them. You'll notice it's much faster to do all of the points that are facing the same direction at the same time, rather than trying to do a complete scale and then move on to the next one. Okay, now I'm going to switch to your white beveler, which is what I do probably 90-95% of my work with. It's good for long straightaways. It goes very quickly and it works very nicely, makes for very smooth lines. But if you have very small segments, so sometimes the distance between the distance on the short end of the scales there is too short for that thing to work. And I designed this pattern such that it would be big enough, just barely, for that stamp to work, because I like to be able to use that stamp. I don't want to switch back and forth. If you want the line to be shorter, so on these ones you don't really want a sharp corner on that side because it's going off into space, you will want to angle your beveler away from the edge that you don't want to be very sharp. The more you work with stamps, the more you'll get a feel for the difference that angling makes it, because whether you're angling it towards you or away from you or to one side or the other will make a difference in how the stamp looks. This here is called walking the tool. When you are tapping very quickly and moving the stamp very smoothly, instead of position, stamp, reposition, stamp, reposition, stamp, when you're just kind of ticking along. It's called walking the tool, and it's how you get very smooth lines and also very quick lines. You'll notice I'm kind of zipping along right there. And it's not hard, but it is something that you will want to learn to do because it'll make you so much faster. So I'm doing one hard stamp just to kind of establish myself, and then tapping along the rest of the line. And it's mostly not this hand that's doing the moving of the tool. It is each little tap of the stamp that's moving it along a little bit. When you're doing your lines, it really doesn't matter whether you're going from right to left or from left to right. Considering that I'm hitting the stamp with this side, it kind of makes sense to tap it this direction. If the other way works better for you, that is perfectly okay. Alright, so doing the little center, the inverted portion of the corner there is a little bit tricky, and the best way that I've found to do it is do it in two steps, where you are doing one that is angled very, very far towards the side of the scale. So instead of going straight up and down, you're angling it very far that way, because you don't actually want to leave lines going off. You don't want to have lines crossing there. You want to make them as subtle as possible. So you will do a relatively steep, relatively deep line that is very sharply angled to make that line nice and sharp and deep. And then you will lean it very far forward, so it's not cutting very deeply, but it is shading very far into. So lean it very far that way, and then it gives it some texture in that direction. And this is an art, not a science. It is something that I doubt most people would even notice or care about. I just care about it because I do it a lot. So I've developed opinions about these things. So I do very sharp, and then very shallow. Sharp, and then shallow. This is your first time doing a leatherworking project, then probably doesn't matter. If it's your first leatherworking project, then you've got more important things to concentrate on. And this is what I was saying earlier about the line you stamp last is the line that will be more pronounced. So I made a line going off in that direction earlier, but now when I hit it from this angle, it will overwrite it. Okay, so that is how you do the scales. Those guys have been done very nicely. What I often like to do afterwards is to take one of these burnishing rods and smooth this area down, so that if you've got any little stray indentations left over from your stylus, or if you cut a little bit too far with your swivel knife, it'll help even them out. Okay, so next thing is about doing all these triangles. And I found that doing the edges of the triangle, the kind of upright edges of the triangle, and then doing the flat bottoms of them works a lot better. I'm going to do up to about there, and then stop so that I can show you how the middle section is done. Because I've only got 30 minutes per segment on this camera, and there is no way that I can stamp this whole thing in 30 minutes. So let's try to just show all the techniques involved and not necessarily doing the whole piece. So again, doing all the lines that are facing the same direction at the same time is going to be faster. Walk you to. Now here's the thing that I forgot to mention. You don't actually want to compress the corners of the triangles because the triangles are all supposed to be raised. Let's see if I can be precise though. In this one, I did not stop. I just stamped straight across. And the corner of this triangle, I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but it did get a bit indented there. This one, I remember that I didn't want to do that. So I stamped this far and then kind of lifted the tool and just moved it and then resumed stamping once it was clear of that little triangle. So again, if it's your first leatherworking project, then you have bigger fish to fry, but these are things I developed over the course of doing this project multiple times that just makes it tiny, like 1%, 2% better. Okay, so now let's switch to the other side and do the other wall. Like with that little segment right there, it is shorter than the length of this stamp, and I didn't want to overshoot in either direction. When you are trying to do a segment that's too short for the beveler, angle it very steeply. That'll let you not have to change out bevelers sometimes. Alright, and by now you should be able to begin to see what I meant when I said that some of the triangles are raised and some of the triangles are compressed. So raised ones and compressed ones. The next step is to do these lines, these 3 lines here. Because with very rare exceptions, every cut line you make should be beveled. The reason you make cut lines is to give your stamp something to follow. So this is really easy, and this is a good use of walking the stamp. Okay, so walking gets you these very smooth lines. If you see, I was going to say, if you look on amateur tooling, it's like if you look on my old tooling, you'll see this. People who've just started, and when they're beveling, they're going to be very lumpy. You're going to see each individual tool mark for the most part, and the way to get them this uniform level of compressed is to walk the stamp so that each little step is overlapping with the previous one, and you're not getting the waviness because it's all getting hit with the center of the tool at some point. Alright, next. Same thing I said before about not wanting to stamp right over the point of the triangles. You want to walk it along the base and then kind of lift it up and start again once you're past the point. Or what I'm doing there, it looks like I'm starting on top of it, but I'm actually angling it this direction so it's not compressing the point. Alright, last step is to do this around the edge here. And if you do nothing else to a piece of leather, you will probably want to put some kind of edge on it. That's why having this tool, which marks off a distance that's parallel to the edge at every point is really, really handy. Like, it just kind of, it brings the whole thing together. It makes it look a lot more finished, a lot more professional, even if you do nothing else to the piece. So if it's just a plain brown leather bracer, it'll look more finished, more polished for having this edge on it. All right, and there's me accidentally starting to compress that one. Do as I say, not as I do, folks. Okay, so assuming that I had done that to all the scales and that to all of the little triangles, the final step is to do the texturing that exists along here. And I also need to bevel down these lines, because all your cut lines should be beveled. Okay, so now we've got this space in here that is not left blank in the original. It has this pebbly sort of organic texture, and there are very many different backgrounding / texturing stamps that you can find. I like this one because it's big, so you can cover a lot of area very quickly. And it is another craft tool. I mean, most of my stamps, unless I specifically say otherwise, are from Tandy. It also comes in different sizes, so if you have to get into smaller crevices, you can switch to the smaller ones. But I think this one I can get away with just using the biggest one. Oh, no, I can't, because there's that little bit there. But you'll do the biggest parts first, and then whatever you couldn't hit with the biggest, you'll switch to the smaller stamps for. So, with these larger stamps, it's pretty easy for them to move, like just kind of just a little bit while you're stamping, and give you this kind of shadow, kind of like a little ghost image next to it, and you really don't want that. You want it to be very precise. So I found the best way to hold stamps is about like this, because you are keeping it steady at all points along the shaft of the tool. If you try to hold it down here, this is going to be waving around when you're trying to hit it. If you try to hold it up here, you're not going to have control over where the tip goes. So hold it about like this. And you can kind of feel, it's also, when you have a large stamp like this, it's more difficult to make sure that all parts of the stamp press down evenly. This is when it's useful sometimes to actually have a press so that you can like haul it down, and the hydraulic press pushes the entire thing down evenly. If you are stamping it by hand, it's really easy sometimes to have one side of, if it's angled at all, then one side of the stamp is going to come out very deep and very crisp and very dark, and the other side is going to be really light, which sometimes is an effect you're going for, but usually not. So you can kind of rotate it around as you're stamping it without moving it to make sure that it hits all places. I kind of did that at the end here because I could feel that this edge of the stamp here had not been compressed as much as the others. Okay, so moving on. And you overlap them slightly and it will look perfectly like pebbling. Now, my tip for using this stamp is that you will stamp it, pick it up, and then rotate it about 90 degrees. And then stamp again, and then rotate it back. Because otherwise you will get a very clear repeating tile, because this is random looking, but like when you're in a video game or a CG thing and the tile is too small and it repeats itself too quickly, it's not going to look random anymore. It's gonna look not very great. But if you just rotate the stamp between each pull, then it'll go great. And it is worth noting that when you have a backgrounded section, you do need to still bevel this area first. It is not going to look good if you neglected to bevel that portion. Okay, so now we're going to do the other side.